This is something to keep in your da'wah tool.
This is not something to keep in your da'wah tool, guys. Not at all, not when he is given a reference for everything he says, up until the point where he makes the big claim that Isaac was 37 when Rebekka was born, when Sarah died. He didn't give any biblical reference for that. Why? Why is that? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Jake Brancatella. And in today's episode, I'm going to discuss a somewhat popular and common argument or claim that some Muslim du'at or apologists, whatever you'd like to call them, make when dialoguing with or discussing with Christians and Jews. And it's regarding the age of Rebekka, who was married to Isaac according to the Bible. And they look at a bunch of Old Testament passages and conclude or deduce that she was only 3 years old when she married Isaac and he was 40 years old. Now, I don't think that I've ever personally used this argument. If I ever mentioned it in passing, I certainly never made a separate video on it, but if I ever made it in a comment about it in passing, then I retract those comments. I don't think that I ever have, but can't remember. But for sure, there are several, and actually many, Muslim du'at who are using this argument and making this claim. I'm going to focus on one person, but he's not alone. There are many people who have been using this. Now, I'm going to play a clip where he breaks this down, and I'm going to show you the fundamental flaw or assumption in the argumentation. Let's take a look.
Genesis 17:17. You guys writing this down? Good. Sarah was 90 years old when Abraham was 100. All right? Sarah was how old? 90. When Abraham was? And this is in Genesis 17:17. All right? 17, not 70, 1717. Ibrahim alayhi salam, or Abraham, was 100 when Isaac or Ishaq was born. How old was he? 100 when Isaac was born, in accordance to Genesis 21:5. Genesis 21:5. Okay. Sarah died at the age of 127 according to Genesis 23:1 and 2, verses 1 and 2. How old was she? 127 years of age when she died according to Genesis, not according to Islam, just talking about the Bible here. Genesis 23 verses 1 and 2. Okay. Isaac, Ishaq alayhi salam, was 40 years old when he married Rebekka, in accordance to Genesis 25:20. How old was he? 40. According to Genesis 25:20, giving you evidences for all of these. Sarah was 90 when Ishaq was born. How do we know that? Concluding from 1 and 2. If Sarah was 90 when Abraham was 100, and Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born, then how old was Sarah when Isaac was born? 90, right? Very clear. Ishaq or Isaac was 37 when his mother died, because 127 minus 90 equals what? 37. You guys with me? You with me or no? You see the clear verses? Okay. You lost track? In number 3 that I mentioned, Sarah died at 127. And she was how old when Isaac was born? 90. So if you subtract...
So far, notice that Sheikh Uthman ibn Farouk is going through all of these different texts in Genesis for how old Isaac was, and Abraham, and Sarah. So far, he's given a biblical reference which explicitly states what he claims at every point. But watch what happens here. Watch the switch now for the key thing that he doesn't actually give a citation for.
D from 127, what do you get? 37. So that means Isaac, according to the Bible, was 37 when his mother Sarah died. Since Isaac was 37 when his mother died, and he was 37 when Rebekka was born, right? Because Rebekka was born when Sarah died.
There, that claim right there. I want you to listen again. Notice he's given a biblical text so far for pretty much every claim he's made up until this point. Listen to it closely again.
Isaac was 37 when his mother died, and he was 37 when Rebekka was born.
He just said that Isaac was 37 when Rebekka was born. Did he give a biblical citation for that? No, he didn't, and you will see that he doesn't. That's the key claim. And also now watch the second part.
Right? Because Rebekka was born when Sarah died.
His proof for that, he says, right, because Rebekka was born when Sarah died. The assumption is that Rebekka was born at the time that Sarah died, which at that time, Isaac was 37, and that they got married 3 years after his mother, Sarah, died. So therefore, Rebekka had to be 3. But notice he did not give a biblical citation for that. He said that Isaac was 37 when Rebekka was born. He didn't give a biblical citation for that. And then his explanation was because Rebekka was born at the same time that Sarah, his mother, died. But where's the biblical reference for that? He didn't give it. I'll explain where the assumption is and why it's a very flawed assumption on many levels.
So, what does that mean? That means that Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekka. Huh? How old was he when she was born? 37. He married her at 40. Huh? So Rebekka would be how old? 3 years old. 3 years old. These are all verses from the Bible itself. So if you want to talk about child marriages, let's talk about it. This is something to keep in your da'wah tool.
This is not something to keep in your da'wah tool, guys. Not at all, not when he is given a reference for everything he says, up until the point where he makes the big claim that Isaac was 37 when Rebekka was born, when Sarah died. He didn't give any biblical reference for that. Why? Why is that? I don't know, maybe he doesn't know any better, but I'll show you where this idea comes from. So as you can see here, this is Genesis 22. And if you scroll down to the bottom, or if you go to the bottom of the chapter, it mentions in verse 20, so Genesis 22:20, now it came about after these things that Abraham was told, saying, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, and it continues on naming all of these people. This is what they're telling Abraham, right? And then in verse 23 it says, and it was Bethel who fathered Rebekka. So all these different names are being listed and who they're the son of and how they're related to Abraham, and all of this is being discussed, right? But does it say anything about how old Isaac was here when Rebekka was born in this passage? No, it doesn't mention anything about it, right? And then if we go to Genesis 23, verse 1, it says, now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died, and blah, 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 and continues on. So the assumption is that Genesis 23, verse 1, and Genesis 22, verse 23, when Rebekka was born, happened at the exact same time. The assumption is that when Rebekka was born in the previous chapter, all of a sudden, when Sarah dies at the beginning of the next chapter, that must be at the same time that Rebekka was born. But why should we assume that at all? There could have been a gap of time in between this discussion and this passage here, because this happens quite frequently in the biblical text, that you can have a time jump, in just a few verses. And this is evident because notice when Abraham is being told these things, he's being told about all of these different children being born. And obviously they weren't all born on the same day. So obviously there's some sort of time difference between this. It wasn't that she was born on the exact same day that Sarah died. And why should we even assume that it's the same month or same year? There's nothing that explicitly says that in the text. It's just a pure assumption that when Sarah dies a few verses later, Rebekka must have been born at the exact same time. There is nothing explicit in the text to demonstrate that. Now, is it possible? Is it even remotely possible? I guess you could say it's very remotely possible, but there's no textual indicators that demonstrate that. And in fact, in other chapters later, there are things about Rebekka and the way that she's described when she gets married that don't seem consistent with her being 3 years old. So I'm not saying absolutely definitively that she was 10 years old or 15. I don't know how old she was. The text doesn't explicitly say how old she was when she got married to Isaac, because it doesn't even tell you how old she was when Sarah died. She didn't have to be 1 month old when Sarah died. She could have been 10 years old when Sarah died. In which case, if they got married 3 years after that, then she would be 13. We don't know. The text doesn't actually say. So just as we want Christians and Jews and outsiders who are investigating Islam or maybe even critiquing it, just as we want them to be fair with our texts, they should expect the same thing with us. And just because you may be able to point to a particular rabbi of a video of him saying this, or in midrashic traditions or anything like that, I'm not going into that. I'm not disputing that. There may be some Jews and some rabbis that held this position. But there's nothing explicit in the text that demonstrates that. And we want to use the best arguments. We want to use the best evidences. We shouldn't be using things that could be critiqued in this way to say that we are making such a logical leap. Now, it's not only Sheikh Uthman ibn Farouk that is using this argument. Brother Muhammad Adi from Muslim Lantern uses this argument. So-called Muslim Cowboy Brandon uses this argument. Daniel Haqiqachu uses this argument. Many of these different guys are using this argument, and it's not a sound argument to be used. It is something that relies on a logical leap that isn't explicit in the text, and we wouldn't want Christians and Jews to do the same sorts of things with our text, with the Quran wa Sunnah, and when they do it, we criticize them. So likewise, we should be able to criticize our own people when they are doing the same thing.